Last month, I ended my talk on Narayana Iyer with a long reply by Bhagavan on the Guru's presence, his sanity. I'm going to post the whole exchange here again because I plan to explore the ramifications of what Bhagavan said on that occasion in some detail. And once I've done that, I will return to the Narayana Iyer story and continue to read out the unpublished chapter on him that I prepared for the next edition of The Power of the Presence. So here on the screen is the full dialogue again, spread over several slides. One day when I was sitting by the side of Sri Bhagavan, I felt so miserable that I put the following question to him. Is the sankalpa, wish, or intention of the jnani not capable of warding off the destinies, prarabdhas of the devotees? Bhagavan smiled and said, does the jnani have a sankalpa at all? The jivan mukta, liberated being, can have no sankalpas whatsoever. It is just impossible. Narayana Iyer is the man in white standing behind Bhagavan on Arunachala. And this is Narayana Iyer's response. I continued, then what is the fate of all of us who pray to you to have grace on us and save us? Will we not be benefited or saved by sitting in front of you or coming to you? What use is there for family men like me coming here to you? And this is how Bhagavan responded to that. Bhagavan turned graciously to me and said, just as a trouble or arrow that comes to destroy the head goes away carrying with it only the turban, so a person's bad karma will be considerably reduced while he is in the presence of a jnani. A jnani has no sankalpa, but his sanity, presence, is the most powerful force. He need not have sankalpa, but his presiding presence, the most powerful force, can do wonders, save souls, give peace of mind, and even liberation to right souls. Bhagavan continued and concluded, your prayers are not answered by him, but absorbed by his presence. His presence saves you, wards off the karma, and gives you the boons, as the case may be, involuntarily. The jnani does save the devotees, but not by sankalpa intention, which is non-existent in him, only through his presiding presence, sanity. And Narayana Iyer's happy response to this was, I was filled with joy. Even today, his presence is the most powerful thing, and that alone, I am confident, saves me. The photo is of Bhagavan sitting on the hill in Skandashram era. At the end of last month's talk, I summarized the implications of this statement. I will briefly go through the main points again. When you take a request or a desire to a jnani, he doesn't choose how or even if to respond to it, nor does he have any desire to intervene in a specific devotee's affairs. And why not? Because the jnani has no desire or intention, no ability to choose how to respond to individual requests. He is not aware of anything outside of the self that needs to be changed, improved, or attended to. The jnani simply abides as the self, and through that self-abidance, a presence, a sanity is created, and it is this sanity that takes care of the requests and the desires. I gave an example of this in last month's talk. Narayana Iyer's wife, Lalita, silently prayed to Bhagavan for financial assistance to help with some upcoming family wedding. The next day, money came when a man from Gujarat sent a message that Bhagavan had appeared to him in a dream and asked him to send money to Narayana Iyer. Neither Narayana Iyer nor his wife had met him before, and they'd never even heard of him. The dream Bhagavan even provided the correct postal address to send the money to. On the right, there is a photo of one of Narayana Iyer's daughters getting married in the garden of their family home, which was close to Ramanasramam. I don't know if this was the wedding that the funds came for, since Narayana Iyer and Lalita had more than one daughter. At the top, you can see Narayana Iyer circled in red in a group photo with Bhagavan, taken in the 1930s. A few of his children are sitting in front of him. When Narayana Iyer and his wife went to Bhagavan to thank him, he had no idea that this intervention had happened. He took no responsibility for it. Bhagavan's continuous self-abidance had brought the sanity into existence, but he had no role in how specifically it dealt with devotees' requests. As he commented on several occasions, these things happened via what he often termed automatic divine activity, and not through a desire on the part of the jnani to help. In the 1990s, I heard Papaji give a very similar explanation of the jnani's sanity and how it worked. This is him on the right in a satsang in Lucknow, and above is a photo of him putting either vibhuti or kumkum on Bhagavan's forehead. This is how he summarized the process. I have a secretary, he said. I call her Miss Peace. She looks after all my business for me. Like most employees, she only works hard when the boss turns up for work. When I come here in the morning, she sees me coming and springs into action. She inspects the minds of everyone who attends the satsangs and deals with all the desires and requests that are manifesting in the minds of the people who are there. If people come with worldly desires, she can grant them. If they come with a desire for silence, she grants that as well. She can even grant liberation to those who are ready for it. She is very, very powerful. Don't think of her as a junior employee. I myself do nothing, but I've learned from experience that I need to turn up and sit in this chair in order for Miss Peace to work hard at full capacity. People come here, he said, from all over the world. They ask for advice about their life. They quiz me on philosophy. They ask me how to get enlightened. I answer all their questions because people feel that these answers or the personal interactions they have with me are important to them. But the main business, the important work, is all being taken care of by Miss Peace. I just sit here while she attends to it all. And that's Papaji's story completed. The next comments are mine. I think this is a great way of envisioning the sanity. The jnani simply abides as the self, doing nothing and desiring nothing. That continuous self-abidance, though, generates a sanity which then looks after all the spiritual and material desires of the devotees who come to the jnani for help. There is another implication in this explanation by Papaji. It seems that Miss Peace, or the sanity, is particularly strong in the physical presence of the jnani. Bhagavan and all the other jnanis I've ever encountered will say that the self is everywhere and that it can be accessed wherever one might be. But from a devotee's point of view, the power is always felt more strongly if the jnani is close by. At the end of last month's presentation, I promised that this month I would have a detailed look at Bhagavan's statement that the presence of the Guru has the capacity to reduce a devotee's karma. In some of his replies on free will and predestination, Bhagavan could be quite extreme, saying that every action performed was a part of one's destiny. This is a typical exchange he had with Devaraji Mudalya, seen here on the bottom right. He wrote, "One summer afternoon, I was sitting opposite Bhagavan in the old hall with a fan in my hand and said to him, I can understand that the outstanding events in a man's life, such as his country, nationality, family, career or profession, marriage, death, etc., are all predestined by his karma. But can it be that all the details of his life, down to the minutest, have already been determined? Now, for instance, I put this fan that is in my hand down on the floor here. Can it be that it was already decided that on such and such a day, at such and such an hour, I shall move the fan like this and put it down here?" And this was Bhagavan's response. Bhagavan replied, "Certainly," he continued. "Whatever this body is to do and whatever experiences it is to pass through was already decided when it came into existence." Thereupon, I naturally exclaimed, "What becomes then of man's freedom and responsibility for his actions?" That's Devaraji Mudalya, again on the right, at a much older age. Bhagavan concluded his explanation in the following way. Bhagavan explained, "The only freedom man has is to strive for and acquire the jnana, which will enable him not to identify himself with the body. The body will go through the actions rendered inevitable by Prarabdha, destiny based on the balance sheet of past lives, and a man is free either to identify himself with the body and be attached to the fruits of its actions, or to be detached from it and be a mere witness of its activities." No exemptions are hinted at here. Bhagavan is saying that all actions are fixed in advance. Mudalya didn't like this attitude. On multiple occasions, he attempted to get Bhagavan to admit that Prarabdha was not immutable and that the grace of God or the Guru had the potential to override the ordained script. Here he is in his memoir describing one such attempt. Another point on which I more than once argued with Bhagavan is the extent to which grace can override Prarabdha or destiny. My main line of argument throughout was, and my conviction now as ever before is, that God is all-powerful and that nothing is impossible for him, as was often said by Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. And also if that one got and could get only what one had worked for and merited, there will be no place at all for grace. Most often, Bhagavan used to keep silent when I indulged in such arguments before him, either by myself or with others, some of whom took my side and others the opposite side. Devaraja Mudalia's argument continues on the next slide. He continued, but from various remarks and observations he made on different occasions, I have come to the conclusion that the following is his attitude in the matter. Quote, of course, nothing is impossible for God, but everything happens according to the order established by God's will or plan, and exceptions are only few and far between. How many Markandeyas are there even in our Puranas? We need some explanation of this. Markandeya was a Puranic figure who escaped his destined death through his exceptional devotion to Shiva. Mrikanda, Markandeya's father, had prayed to Shiva to get a son. Shiva appeared before him and said, do you desire to have a virtuous, wise son who will live only to be 16, or a dull-witted, evil-natured son who will live for a long time? Mrikanda opted for the short-lived son who turned out to be a child sage. On the day of his appointed death, when Yama, the god of death, came to collect him, Markandeya called out to Shiva for help and embraced the lingam of Shiva that he usually meditated on. Yama threw his rope and lassoed the lingam as well as Markandeya. This angered Shiva, who physically manifested to help Markandeya and then killed Yama with a single blow of his foot. Shiva then granted Markandeya the boon that he could be 16 forever and thus avoid death. He also restored Yama's life. Bhagavan here was willing to accept that in exceptional circumstances such as this, Prarabdha could be circumvented, but in his final line, how many Markandeyas are there even in our Puranas, he is indicating that these exceptions are, to quote him again, few and far between. I want to explore this story a little more. It was one of Bhagavan's favorites. This is what Bhagavan wrote about Markandeya in verse 205 of Guru Vachika Kovai. He concedes there that devotion to Shiva outranks what in the verse is labeled unswerving fate. This is what the verse says. Markandeya fought and conquered death and attained the immortal state through the Shiva puja he performed, thus living beyond the life ordained for him, making unswerving fate air and escaping from inescapable death. Hence, if anyone worships Shiva, the killer of Yama, by inquiring with full awareness, then Yama's noose, which has the power to ensnare, without exception all jivas, will, in these exceptional cases, get frayed and cut and be unable to catch them. It seems to me that Bhagavan is saying here that self-inquiry, or as he puts it here, quote, inquiring with full awareness, quote, has the power in some instances to change Prarabdha. But again, the implication is that such interventions are great rarities. Bhagavan calls them here exceptional cases. Bhagavan also mentioned this same story in Ramana Puranam. There he wrote, by meditating upon the twin feet of the Lord who knows what is written, he who destroys and reduces to nothing the burden of fate, written upon the heads of the most excellent of his devotees, the brahmachari Markandeya overcame through the intensity of his love for the one who ordained his destiny, the fate that decreed that he should die as it had been ordained. Bhagavan makes it clear in these lines that having intense love for God can change or end Prarabdha, something that Devaraja Mudalia was always trying to get him to admit. This quotation, by the way, is from the portion of the Ramana Puranam that was written by Bhagavan himself, not by Muruganar. Muruganar is seen seated on the front right of this photo. Devaraja Mudaliar was never happy with Bhagavan's absolutist position on free will, even though Bhagavan had admitted that the apparent preeminence of Prarabdha could be overcome in rare and exceptional cases. Here is Devaraja Mudaliar citing a reply from Bhagavan himself, making the claim that it is not just in rare cases that Prarabdha can be mitigated or even annulled. He wrote in his book again, on the other hand, many authoritative books have clearly said, and Bhagavan has quoted them with approval, that one look from a jnani can save us from the effects of all our karmas, past or present, Prarabdha included. And Sri Janaki Mata has published in her journal Arul that when she discussed this question once with Bhagavan, herself maintaining that his grace can help one even to overcome Prarabdha, he told her, if you have such faith, it will be so. So this is another exception to the rule of Prarabdha that has not been mentioned before. The implication of this paragraph is that if the devotee genuinely and firmly believes that Prarabdha can be undone by faith in God, then that belief makes it possible. This is another crack in the edifice of karmic inevitability. Janaki Mata was a devotee of Bhagavan who was regarded as being a saint in her own right. She had an ashram in Tanjore and frequently visited Bhagavan. Sadhu Om was one of her devotees in the early 1940s before he came to Bhagavan around 1946. He was actually the editor of the journal Arul, which Devaraja Mudaliar refers to in this story. You can see Janaki Mata garlanded in the center of this old photo, and behind her with the shaved head is a very young looking Sadhu Om. The Tamil sign over their heads indicates that it was taken at a function to celebrate Bhagavan's Jayanti. The photo of her at the bottom comes from an obituary notice in a 1969 issue of the Mountain Path. That was the year she passed away. This particular exception to the rules of Prarabdha requires a devotee to have full faith that the Guru has the power to undo scripted destiny. Here is Devaraja Mudaliar again giving an instance of what he interpreted to be evidence that this is possible. This is what he wrote. When Sri Jagadisha Sastri, the Sanskrit Pandit in Bhagavan's court, was on his deathbed, he wrote his final appeal in his poems, declaring that he would not accept any plea by Bhagavan that Prarabdha must follow its course. He said that if Bhagavan only willed it, his grace could cancel Prarabdha and save him. Bhagavan took such compassion on him that he was pulled out of the jaws of death and is now flourishing in Madras. Not only I, but many other close devotees of Bhagavan fully believe that it was only Bhagavan's grace that saved the Sastri from certain death. The photo is of Jagadisha Sastri and his wife standing on the hill with Bhagavan. Devaraja Mudaliar has been in, how shall we say, full lawyer mode over the past few slides. And I like the way he pushed Bhagavan on this. He started with a statement from Bhagavan that Prarabdha is immutable, and then proceeded to interrogate it by citing Bhagavan himself, introducing evidence of exceptions and loopholes that make the original premise a lot more flexible. The story of Markandeya and the reply that Bhagavan gave to Janaki Mata indicates that Prarabdha can be overcome in the right circumstances. After narrating the story of Jagadisha Sastri, which he took to illustrate his contention that full faith in the Guru could overcome one's destined death, Mudaliar went on to cite the example of Rangan, the schoolboy friend of Bhagavan. The story provided additional evidence for Mudaliar that simply being in the Sanadi, the presence, is enough to counteract and even eliminate Prarabdha. This is Rangan in a group photo. He is the man with folded arms, second from the right. Two families are arranged around the photo of Bhagavan. Rangan, circled in red, is on the right of the photo. To the left of Bhagavan's photo is the family of Poki Ramani, also known as Bilacheri Mani Iyer. He was also a childhood associate of Bhagavan. He is the other man circled in red. I'm guessing the photo dates from the late 1920s. Here is Rangan telling his own story over several slides. It's a very interesting one. According to my horoscope, the year 1921 was destined to be an especially bad period in my life. Bhagavan told me many times that I should not leave him during this period. In saying this, he also seemed to acknowledge that this period would be a potentially troublesome time for me. During this year, while I was staying at Skandashram, a friend of mine came to Bhagavan and asked me to accompany him to Madras. Rangan continues, I had planned to go, but Bhagavan told me, put him on the train and come back here at once. Don't stay at any chowtri, that's a guest house for pilgrims in town. Even if it is very late at night, come straight here from the station. I followed his advice since Bhagavan had clearly spotted some hidden danger. On another occasion, during this same period, I wanted to perform the new moon rites on my father's grave. This is a slight enlargement of the previous photo. Rangan is on the right with his arms folded. He continues, when I told Bhagavan about my desire, he showed me a photo of my father and said, your father is here. You need not travel anywhere else for these ceremonies. On that particular day, Bhagavan refused to give me permission to go anywhere. He was not always so strict. On a few occasions during this period, he would give me permission to go to Madras, but he would always tell me that I should come back as soon as I'd finished my business there. At some point during the year, some of my friends decided to go and work in Singapore. They asked me if I would like to go with them. Because I was afraid of poverty, I agreed. This is a close-up of Rangan taken from the previous group photo. This photo is the only one I know that features Rangan, which is why it keeps appearing in this story. Rangan concludes his story. When I went to Bhagavan to get his permission, he heard my story and said, all right, we will see, but he would not give me his permission to leave the ashram. After several requests, I finally persuaded him to allow me to go to Madras and join my friends. On my arrival there, I learned that my friends, after seeking me in vain, had left for Singapore without me. By Bhagavan's grace and by his determined physical intervention, I survived the year without experiencing any mishaps. For me, there are two interesting aspects to this story. The first is that Bhagavan himself recognized that Rangan was in some sort of physical danger and took direct steps to make sure that this destined outcome didn't happen. This is very, very unusual. I can't think of anyone else who was ordered to remain in Bhagavan's presence for a long period in order to avoid a destined calamity. The second is the implication that the full protection from the effects of the Prarabdha was only possible when Rangan stayed close to Bhagavan. Bhagavan did not say, you can go wherever you like, I'm looking after you wherever you are. He made a point of saying that Rangan had to be in the physical samadhi as much as possible in order to circumvent the danger that his Prarabdha had in store for him. Bhagavan only allowed him to go back to his old life once he could see that the danger had been averted. At this point in the discussion, I'm going to introduce Lakshmana Swami because he had some very interesting things to say about sitting in the presence of a jnani and the effect this might have on one's Prarabdha. On the right, there is a photo of him taken in 1951. The one on the left was taken in the mid-1970s. Once while we were sitting with him, he said that when he was out walking, he could see people whose destinies were completely fixed. He said, I never look for this information, it just strikes me occasionally. I can see the futures of some people. Occasionally, I can even see who or what they're going to be in their next life, including animals. His conclusion, based on this information that randomly came to him, was that the futures of people who were not meditating or striving for self-realization were fixed, that they were moving along the rails of Prarabdha to an unavoidable destination. But then he added, I never see this kind of information when I'm sitting with devotees who are here because they want to know the self. This is interesting. For me, the implication of this is that if you are in the presence of a jnani, the constraints of Prarabdha are considerably loosened, the future can be changed in the physical sanity of a jnani, and the jnani can't see any specific future for people who are sitting in front of him. There is no record of Bhagavan saying anything like this himself, but this is one possible implication of the Rangan story I just read out. The presence of a jnani really does have the power to change physical scripts for the better. Before I move on, I will add one more story because it is another instance of Bhagavan refusing to let a devotee leave his presence because he seemed to be aware that something bad was about to happen. The devotee in this story is G.V. Subramaya, a Telugu professor who had had a long and close association with Bhagavan. It was in fact G.V. Subramaya who first introduced Lakshmana Swami to Bhagavan when he gave an end-of-term lecture at his Nellore college. Here is Subramaya narrating his experience with Bhagavan, detaining him at Ramanashram, and that's a photo of him on the right. On the day of my departure from Ramanashram, a most extraordinary thing happened. It was Saturday. I was due to attend college on Monday, so I wanted to start that noon. After packing and arranging my baggage, I went to Sri Bhagavan to prostrate and get permission to leave. On all such previous occasions, Sri Bhagavan would either say, yes, go, or give a silent nod of approval. This time, Sri Bhagavan said, your college reopens on Monday. Why should you go now? Subramaya continued. I at once replied, I won't go now, I shall stay, and I cancelled my travel arrangements. That whole afternoon, he was especially gracious to me and took great pains to teach me the Malayalam alphabet. That evening, as he was starting to go up the hill, I again asked whether I might go by the evening train. He inquired whether it was a through train. No, I replied, it will stop at Katpadi. Subramaya's account continues. In that case, said Sri Bhagavan, why should you spend the night at Katpadi station? Why not be here? I again postponed my journey. The early morning train of the next day was the last possible one for me. At about 5 a.m., I went for Sri Bhagavan's darshan. As soon as he saw me, he inquired whether I had finished breakfast. I answered that I had. Are you ready to start? Yes, I replied and prostrated. As I got up and looked at him, I noticed that the look on his face had completely changed. His eyes were wide open, fixed and steady. He seemed to be seeing through me and beyond me into the infinite. I had never had such a gaze from Sri Bhagavan before. I felt like Arjuna in Visvarupa Sandarshan. I was face to face with pure divine majesty. I stood spellbound. 5 minutes, 10 minutes passed, the cartman was pressing. I mumbled the words, I take leave, but there was no response, not the least change in the lustrous long gaze. I came away overwhelmed with awe and fear. Everyone said that the way Sri Bhagavan treated me was unprecedented, and that it signified some momentous change for me. The momentous change predicted occurred a few months later. This is what he wrote. Within 3 months, I discovered what it was. My wife had a sudden serious pre-delivery complication and was admitted to hospital on 23rd December. That very night, she delivered a stillborn baby. On the same day, I wired to the ashram reporting her condition and praying for Sri Bhagavan's grace. But to my amazement, I received no reply till 27th December. That evening, I got word that her illness had taken a serious turn. As I was hurrying to the hospital, the following letter from the ashram dated 26th December was put into my hands. It said, your card has been received today and it was placed before Sri Bhagavan. The wire was received on the 23rd and it was also duly placed before Sri Bhagavan. The telegram gave a wrong name of Subramanya, which prevented us from addressing a reply. And then Subramaya continues, however, before I reached the hospital, it was all over. The body of my wife was still warm when I arrived, and I could not believe she was dead until the doctor, at my request, examined her again and pronounced her life extinct. He continues, till then, I was all anxiety, but at that moment I felt as though a heavy weight had been lifted from my mind. A heavenly peace descended on me, and I became a completely new man. In that moment, my mind's eye opened out to the beatific presence of Sri Bhagavan, and I thrilled at the sweet serenity of Sri Bhagavan's gracious look. From then on, my mind became fully conscious of Sri Bhagavan's guidance. Subramaya concludes his account. Subramaya, I've made the same mistake as the telegram man. Subramaya concludes his account. Of all the frenzied mourners gathered at the time, I can say truthfully that I was the only calm person. I took the lead and arranged everything. I did my best to console the others. I acted like a perfect automaton. My conduct in that crisis was to me the greatest marvel of Sri Bhagavan's grace. I informed Sri Bhagavan what had happened. A colleague of mine was present in the hall when Sri Bhagavan perused my card. He apparently gave it a long, fixed gaze that was similar to the look he had given me in person at my previous departure. This story is a little different from the one that Rangan narrated, since the Prarabdha of Subramaya's wife was not changed. Bhagavan was clearly aware in some way that her death was coming soon. In this case, he was unable or unwilling to do anything about it, but he did know that Subramaya would be devastated by the event. So he detained him at Ramanashram and gave him enough grace to withstand the shock when it finally came. And not just withstand the shock, in a moment when his grief should have been at the maximum, Subramaya wrote, "A heavenly peace descended on me and I became a completely new man. In that moment, my mind's eye opened out to the beatific presence of Sri Bhagavan, and I thrilled at the sweet serenity of Sri Bhagavan's gracious look. From then on, my mind became fully conscious of Sri Bhagavan's guidance." This story adds a little nuance to the general narrative of to what extent the Guru can intervene in the Prarabdha of devotees. In this case, the death of Subramaya's wife could not be averted, even though Bhagavan could see it coming. But by detaining Subramaya at Ramanashram and by giving him a major transmission, Bhagavan was able to ensure that one of his closest devotees not only weathered the personal storm that was heading his way, he made him do it in such a way that he was filled with joy and peace when the inevitable death happened. I want to go back to where I started this talk, to the teaching that Bhagavan gave to Narayana Iyer on the effect that the sannyasa could have on a devotee's karma. This is part of the reply he gave to Narayana Iyer on that occasion. Just as a trouble or arrow that comes to destroy the head goes away carrying with it only the turban, so a person's bad karma will be considerably reduced while he is in the presence of a jnani. This is a widely held belief and one that Bhagavan appears to support in this answer to Narayana Iyer. If your Prarabdha includes a major accident, for example, the power of the Guru's presence can occasionally reduce its seriousness. I will throw in a personal anecdote here to illustrate the point. On the right, there is a photo of Saudama taken in 1986, and at the top there is a photo of the two of us together taken at Lakshmana Swami's ashram in the mid-80s, around the time this story took place. Saudama told me later that she had had a strong premonition that I was due to have a serious car accident, but she didn't pass on that information to me at the time. Shortly afterwards, I was doing some cleaning in the small temple dedicated to Bhagavan that is located in the ashram. As I was attempting to unhook a large and heavy photo of Lakshmana Swami from the wall, the ladder I was on moved away from the wall and I fell heavily holding onto the photo. Although my feet were probably only about 2 feet from the ground, when the ladder slid away from me, I ended up fracturing my femur. Once I was settled in a very good hospital, I sent a copy of the X-ray to a doctor friend of mine in the UK. He wrote back saying, "I think you've sent me the wrong X-ray. I don't think you can get a break like this by only falling 2 feet off a ladder. This is the classic break you get when you are hit in the side by a car traveling at about 60 kilometers an hour." So my destined major car accident happened while I was holding onto a jnani's photo inside a temple dedicated to Sri Ramana. I have no idea what was scheduled in my unmodified Prarabdha, but I suspect it would have been a lot more dangerous and life-threatening than what actually happened. I showed Bhagavan's full reply to Narayana Iyer to Papaji when I was staying with him in Lucknow in the mid-1990s. Then I asked him the following question about it. It looks like I was referencing my own experience of the car crash that never happened. On the right, there is a photo of me interviewing him in a government park in Lucknow. The interview was published later in Papaji Interviews, the book, at the bottom of the slide. So this was my question. David, the Maharshi said in one of those answers that sitting in the Guru's presence reduces the effect of bad karma. Many other masters have said the same. For example, one may be destined to be seriously injured in a car crash, but if one is with one's Guru at the time the accident is due to happen, one might get away with a minor injury, such as a small cut or a bruise. Do you accept this traditional view? Papaji gave me a long and detailed answer and even wrote it out for me. I had given him a questionnaire that contained many questions about the power of the Guru. Rather than reply to me verbally or address the question in one of his satsangs, which was something he occasionally did when I asked him questions like this, he chose to sit at his living room table and write out very long replies for me. On the right, you can see him writing out his responses to some of the questions I gave him. He was wearing a surgical collar at the time because of neck problems. I think that made it hard for him to see what he was writing. I'm sure it would have been much easier to give me a verbal answer, but on this occasion he chose to write it out for me at great length. I have no idea where he got this story from, and I never heard him repeat it on any other occasion. It is, as I said, a long story and a very long reply, but it's worth giving it in full. This is how he began, the words on the slide. The Guru can change karma completely, not just lessen its effect. The word of the jnani is the final authority in this world or any other. Not even God can overrule him or countermand his orders. There is a Sufi story that makes this point. This photo was taken at the interview I did with him in the Lucknow Park, the one that I featured 2 slides ago. Papaji now starts his retelling of the long Sufi story. Moses used to go up to Mount Sinai every year to talk to God. On his way there, he used to pass by the house of a farmer who lived at the foot of the hill. This farmer gave hospitality to travelers, so Moses used to stay with him whenever he passed that way. One year, the farmer asked Moses what business he had in the area. Moses replied, "Every year I come here, I climb to the top of Mount Sinai and talk to God." The farmer said, "We are quite well off here. We have money, we have hundreds of acres to farm, and we have thousands of cattle. The only thing we don't have is a child. I don't know if we are destined to have a child or not, but God must know something like that. I know that everything is destined, so he must know what is due to happen to us in the future. Next time you see God, ask him if we are going to be blessed with a child. If he gives you an answer, you can tell us on the way back." All the remaining slides that tell this story will have photos of Papaji taken either in Lucknow, Rishikesh, or Haridwar. Moses went to the top of Mount Sinai, and during the course of his usual annual conversation with God, he mentioned the farmer's request. God said, "All these things are written down in my ledgers. We have a special department here that keeps all these records. I will show you the relevant book, and you can look up this man's name in it." The ledger of future destinies was produced, and Moses turned to the page that was devoted to the farmer's family. The column in which the names of children would have been written was blank. "In that case," said God, when Moses told him about the entry, "they will not have children. An empty column means no children." Moses thanked God for his help and went back down the mountain to tell the farmer and his wife what he had seen in the Book of Destiny. The farmer resigned himself to his fate. "If this is so," he said, "there is nothing we can do. Thank you for at least finding out the truth for us." A few days later, a saint, an enlightened man, also passed by that house on his way to Mount Sinai. The farmer gave him the usual hospitality. The saint asked about his children, and the farmer replied, "We don't have any, and we're not destined to have any. A man was here a few weeks ago. He looked into God's Book of Destinies and found that we were not going to have any children. We have given up hope." The saint was very happy with the hospitality that the farmer and his wife had extended to him, so he blessed them before he left. The following year, when Moses came on his annual visit, he was surprised to see the farmer's wife holding a small baby. "Whose baby is that?" he asked. "Is someone staying with you?" "No," replied the farmer's wife, "it's mine. I gave birth a few weeks ago." But how could this happen, wondered Moses out loud. I myself saw God's own book of destiny, and he even told me himself that you would not have any children. I don't know how it happened, responded the woman, but I do know that a saint visited us a few days after you did. We didn't tell him what we wanted, but he was happy with our hospitality, and he blessed us before he left. Moses thought to himself, someone is getting careless in God's accounts department. I should tell him about this next time I see him. It's not good to have people making mistakes like this. A few days later, during his annual conversation with God on the summit of Mount Sinai, Moses brought up the subject of the incorrect records. I saw this book myself, said Moses, and the children column was blank. But this same woman gave birth a few weeks ago. Someone in your record-keeping department must have made a mistake. Bring the book, said God to one of his attendants. I should find out what has been happening. The book was brought, and the appropriate page was shown to God. When God and Moses looked at the book together, they saw that a symbol, like the letter U, had been added to the children's page. Oh, this explains it, said God. This U is a picture of an enlightened man's tongue. Some jnani must have blessed this woman and announced that she would have a baby. The word of a jnani is paramount. Whatever he says has to happen, even if these things are not written in the book of destiny. The jnani's tongue is outside my control. It can undo anything that is written in my destiny books. And here is the final installment of the story. This is Papaji's summary conclusion to the long story he just narrated. He said, this is how it is. In the presence of an enlightened man, your desires can be fulfilled, even if you never specifically mention them. The jnani can even undo your destiny. You may be destined for a particular fate, but one word from the jnani can change it. Even sitting in his presence can change your destiny. This is what Lakshmana Swami was saying when he said that he never saw the futures of people who were sitting in his presence. The sannyasi has the power to change or even eliminate Prarabdha. The photo on the screen, by the way, is the two of us, me and Papaji, on a bridge in Haridwar in 1993. Having read everything Bhagavan has said and written on the subject of destiny, Prarabdha, I'm inclined to agree with this conclusion by Papaji, even though Bhagavan was occasionally quite insistent that Prarabdha could not be altered. In his writings and verbal replies, Bhagavan taught that Ishvara issues us with a scripted life, a Prarabdha, and allocates consequences to the actions that we perform with the I am the doer idea. But as Bhagavan and Papaji have made clear, Ishvara is not the ultimate authority here. The Guru's power is such that his word or his presence both have the power to undo the Prarabdha that has been issued to us. These interventions may be rare, but the power of Prarabdha does not outrank the power of the Guru's sanity. And now, finally, it's time to get back to the story of Narayana Iyer. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cough. At the end of last month's talk and at the beginning of this one, I read out Bhagavan's reply to Narayana Iyer's question on the power of the Guru. The power the Guru has to intervene in devotees' lives when they ask for help with their affairs. After reading Bhagavan's response, I then set out on a long digression on sanity and how it has the power to overcome or eliminate karma. This is what comes next in the chapter about Narayana Iyer. He wrote, Bhagavan is God himself, and in saying this, I do not refer to any of the personal gods of any religion, but to the universal principle or pure consciousness. I dislike comparing him with any past personage, for there is no meaning in comparing incarnations of that one principle which has no second, but yet for our understanding, if at all we want to compare, it could only be with Christ or Buddha. Narayana Iyer continued, I never forgot, whenever I was talking with him or sitting in his presence, that here was God sitting and talking. It is our greatest fortune that the Supreme Consciousness, appearing in the garb of a human body, graciously undertook to come down to our level of understanding and bore the tremendous task of importing to us the truth of Atma Vidya, self-knowledge. Such a thought always made me understand him and his talks better and more clearly. The idea that the Supreme Consciousness took Sri Ramana's form to impart true knowledge is one that Muruggana also espoused and wrote about. Here he is articulating his own very similar sentiments. In one of his verses, he said, "In the past, I did not know that which is termed as Supreme Brahman. Now that I have seen it and known it, I experience joy. It moves about in the form of a mendicant, supporting itself on a walking stick, looking around for souls to save with the gaze of his lotus eyes." And on the right, we have Bhagavan wandering around on Arunachala with that self-same walking stick. This originally appeared as verse 201 in Murugana's Sri Ramana Deva Malai. Devaraja Mudalya also liked this verse and made his own translation in his memoir, My Recollections of Bhagavan Sri Ramana. Narayana Iyer now starts on an interesting section in which he explains how he once felt disadvantaged by his lack of scriptural knowledge. He wrote, "Once some very learned Sanskrit scholars were sitting in the old hall discussing portions of the Upanishads and other scriptural texts with Bhagavan. Bhagavan was giving them proper explanations, and it was a sight to remember and adore. At the same time, I felt genuinely in my heart, oh, how great these people are and how fortunate they are to be so learned and to have such deep understanding and be able to discuss with our Bhagavan. Compared with them, what am I, a zero in scriptural learning?" Narayana Iyer continued, "I felt miserable. After the pundits had taken leave, Bhagavan turned to me and said, 'What?' looking into my eyes and studying my thoughts. Then, without even giving me an opportunity to explain, he continued, 'This is only the husk. All this book learning and capacity to repeat the scriptures by memory is absolutely no use. To know the truth, you need not undergo all this torture of learning. Not by reading do you get the truth. Be quiet, that is truth. Be still, that is God.'" Narayana Iyer continued, "Then, very graciously, he turned to me again, and there was an immediate change in his tone and attitude. He asked me, 'Do you shave yourself?' Bewildered by this sudden change, I answered tremblingly that I did. Bhagavan explained his point. For shaving you use a mirror, don't you? You look into the mirror and then shave your face. You don't shave the image in the mirror. Similarly, all the scriptures are meant only to show you the way to realization. They are meant for practice and attainment. Mere book learning and discussions are comparable to a man shaving the image in the mirror. From that day onwards, the sense of inferiority I had been feeling vanished once and for all." This led Narayana Iyer to inquire of Bhagavan about his own spiritual practices. He wrote, "One more assurance from Bhagavan that he also gave as a personal instruction is of absolute value for me in my sadhana. I cried to him that I knew nothing about Vedanta, nor could I practice austerity, being a householder. So I prayed to him to help me by showing the reality or the way to it. I also frankly admitted that Bhagavan's own method of self-inquiry was too hard for me." This was Bhagavan's advice. He graciously responded, "You know Oladu Napadu, don't you? It imparts pure truth, deals with it and explains it. Go on reading it verse by verse. The words of the verses will, in course of time, vanish and pure truth, sat alone, will shine, like the snake relinquishing its skin and coming out shining. This is now my sadhana." Narayana Iyer's recollection of feeling spiritually inferior when he couldn't understand the discussion on Sanskrit texts in the hall reminds me of a very similar incident that had taken place a few years before. On that occasion, the devotee who couldn't understand what was going on was Sadhu Nathananda. He had been listening to a discussion between Bhagavan, Ganapati Muni, Kapali Sastri, who was one of Ganapati Muni's disciples, and an unnamed group of Sanskrit pandits. That's Ganapati Muni with Bhagavan in the top photo. Kapali Sastri is the man sitting at the desk in the bottom photo. Kapali Sastri was the translator of Satdarshana Bhashya and the editor of the very interesting collection of dialogues with Bhagavan that preceded in the book. This is what Sadhu Nathananda wrote. On one Vyasa Purnima day, a festival that is celebrated on the day of the July-August full moon, Ganapati Muni, Kapali Sastri, along with a group of Sanskrit scholars, were walking around the mountain. They stopped off at the ashram to pay their respects to the Maharshi. When they were seated in the old hall, they started discussing philosophy in Sanskrit. That's Sadhu Nathanananda on the right, and this is how his report continued. I was listening to the discussion, and I knew that they were discussing philosophy, but I could not follow the meaning. Because of this, my mind began to wander, and I became quite agitated, wondering when the day would dawn, when I would have the experiences that they were talking about. My longing for these experiences was so intense that I lost all consciousness of the body. I was not sure how long I remained in that state, but suddenly a voice brought back my normal consciousness. Here is another photo of Sadhu Nathanananda sitting in his garden, and this is how he continued with his account. All the others had left, and only Bhagavan remained in the hall. "Why are you so dejected?" said the voice. "If you are really unfit to realize the self in this life, then you would not have come to this place at all. The power that drew you here will make you realize the self. If not today, it is bound to fulfill its commitment. There is no reason why you should feel dejected." It was these gracious words that brought me back to life, and peace immediately entered my soul. This was an extraordinary promise that Bhagavan made to Nathanananda, that he would not be sitting in front of Bhagavan if he was unfit to realize the self in his current life. I can't recollect Bhagavan making this statement to any other devotee. And did it happen as Bhagavan predicted? You can judge for yourselves as I read out these verses that Sadhu Nathanananda composed many, many years later. Dr. Venkata Subramaniam found them in a notebook that Nathanananda had donated to Sri Ramana. They come from a poem entitled Tiravarut Selvan, meaning the wealth of grace. Since we were translating Nathanananda's Tamil book, Sri Ramana Darshanam, at the time, we included them in the English edition that was subsequently published by Sri Ramana. Many of the verses summarize Bhagavan's teachings, but the ones I'm putting on the screen speak of his own experience of the self. Going through them, I get the feeling that Bhagavan's promise of realization in this life was fulfilled. This is what he wrote. "By getting rid of oppressive attachment, I died. What is now animating the body is being consciousness, that which abides as my Lord. Losing self-awareness, I was chained in the body by the vile senses. I was liberated by consciousness that manifested in my heart as the soul of my soul. As desires ceased through the blessings of my master, the mind, which was never previously satisfied, now attained fullness and completeness." Here are three more. "Having succeeded in getting the good fortune of practicing devotion to the feet of the Lord in whom grace is abounding, the soul, which was merged in dark delusion, attained the heart state. To my eye of jnana, which has seen the truth, the self appears everywhere. The illusory objects perceived by the senses, which I saw when I was deluded, no longer appear. When the glittering sun appears, no stars are seen. Similarly, when my godliness arose, no thought appeared." And here are the final three verses. There is a chapter on Sadhu Nathanananda in part 1 of The Power of Presence. These verses are included there. When the expanded version of the book comes out, I will add more verses from these previously unpublished poems. "Jnana did not shine as long as the ego manifested. When the self appeared, ego disappeared by itself. By thinking without thought of the one, Bhagavan, who, like Arunachala, abides without movement, I sank into the heart. Appearing as the Guru outside and as consciousness within, he weeded out the illusory mind and revealed my real nature." And here, just as a kind of bonus, is a nice old clip of Sadhu Nathanananda speaking in his garden. It comes from a French documentary entitled Ashrams that was made by Arnaud Desjardins in 1959. It features clips of famous gurus of that era, such as Anandamayi Ma, Swami Shivananda, Swami Ramdas, Mother Krishnabai. It also includes a segment on Ramanashram. This little speech by Sadhu Nathanananda in his garden comes from that section of the film. Unfortunately, a lot of what he said in Tamil was dubbed by a French voiceover, and some of the comments, as I will explain later, are not very accurate.
Un des innombrables lieux de retraite de l'Inde, où quelques disciples se rassemblent autour d'un maître spirituel, un gourou. Celui-ci s'appelait Sri Ramana Maharshi. Il est mort il y a quelques années. Ce vieillard était son premier disciple. Il nous a livré en langue tamile quelques aperçus de la pensée du maître.
Everyone has to understand his real being, truth of his being. That's the crux of his teaching. ஆனால் பெரும்பான்மையோர் தன்னுடைய உண்மை தான் அல்லாத உடல் முதலிய பற்றித்தான் தானாக நினைத்துக் கொண்டு இருக்கிறார்கள். Majority of his devotees think.
Le peu que j'ai compris de la traduction anglaise m'a paru à la fois simple et obscur. Chacun de nous doit comprendre son être, la vérité de son être. Nous devons arriver à la séparation du soi et du corps pour parvenir au soi. Le grand enseignement du maître, ce vers quoi les disciples doivent tendre avant tout, c'est à la connaissance suprême du soi.
அதற்கு அடிப்படையாகத்தான் எல்லோருக்கும் ஹூ ஆம் ஐ, நான் யார் என்று பார் என்ற உபதேசத்தை அவர் சொன்னார்.
The on-screen claim that Sadhu Natanananda was Bhagavan's first disciple is clearly wrong. Sadhu Natanananda first met Bhagavan in 1917 when Bhagavan was living at Skandashram. After that detour into the promise that Bhagavan made to Sadhu Natanananda, I'm going to make an even longer detour into a different topic that also features Natanananda. It concerns devotees who asked Bhagavan to initiate them into sannyasa. It's a very distinguished group of devotees who were all, in their own way, spiritually mature, but Bhagavan said no to all their requests. First, though, here is a comment by Bhagavan that was recorded by Arthur Osborne. I included it in last month's talk on Narayana Iyer. This is what Osborne wrote. It was he, Narayana Iyer, who asked for a clarification on the state of a family man who follows the path of jnana, and to whom Bhagavan said, remaining as a family man, you can certainly engage in spiritual practice. Even better than the man who thinks, I have renounced everything, is the one who does his duty, but does not think, I do this or I am the doer. A sannyasi who thinks, I am a sannyasi, cannot be a true sannyasi, whereas a householder who does not think, I am a householder, is truly a sannyasi. This was Bhagavan's standard advice to everyone who consulted him about taking sannyasa. There is not a single recorded instance of Bhagavan either initiating anyone into sannyasa or even approving requests by devotees who wanted to go elsewhere for the required initiation. This is what happened when Sadhu Natanananda tried. The words on the screen are taken from the introduction to Sadhu Natanananda that appears in the chapter about him in The Power of the Presence, Part 1. This introduction is an amalgamation of two separate accounts, Arthur Osborne's Ramana Maharshi and the Path of Self-Knowledge, and Kanji Swami's Enadu Ninai Bugal. Sadhu Natanananda's original name was Niteshi Mudaliar, and before he came to Bhagavan, he was a school teacher. This is from the account. Mudaliar Natanananda was one of those whose eagerness and desire to make every effort drove them to the idea of becoming a sannyasin. As in other cases, Sri Bhagavan discouraged this. Just as you avoid the cares of home life while you are here, go home and try to be equally unconcerned and unaffected there. Mudaliar still lacked the full reliance and conviction of a disciple towards his guru, and he made the renunciation despite Bhagavan's clear injunction. He found, as Bhagavan had predicted, that the difficulties on his path grew greater, not less. After some time, he returned again to his family and took up work again. That's Natanananda at the bottom, next to a cover of Part 1 of The Power of the Presence. I spoke to Kanji Swami about this Natanananda story around 1990. This is how I recorded Kanji Swami's comments in a footnote that I added to the Natanananda story in The Power of the Presence. According to Kanji Swami, personal conversation, Natanananda asked Bhagavan to give him the orange robes of a sannyasin. Natanananda had brought the cloth to Bhagavan's hall, but Bhagavan refused to touch it. Natanananda then put the cloth on the stool in front of Bhagavan that visitors put their offerings on. After a few minutes, he took it away and began to wear it. A few months later, when Natanananda decided to give up his life as a sannyasin, he presented the orange robes to Bhagavan. For the rest of his life, he only ever wore white clothes. That's Kanji Swami, standing on the right. I spoke to Dorab Framji about Sadhu Natanananda's householder period, and he surprised me by saying that for many years, Natanananda fulfilled his family obligations by managing a rice mill. That seemed rather incongruous to me. Dorab gave him a room in his compound when he retired and came to live in Tiruvannamalai again, and allowed him to be buried in its garden when he passed away in 1981. Dorab once showed me where it was. It was an unmarked grave under a parijata tree. Every morning, an abundance of small orange and white flowers would drop from the tree, making a little floral carpet on his grave. I thought that was very nice. Kanji Swami also tried to get Bhagavan to give him sannyasa and was turned down like everyone else. Undeterred, he went to the Himalayas and found a teacher there who was willing to give him the requisite initiation. He returned to Ramanaswaram and announced to Bhagavan that he had a new Swami name. I can't remember what it was, but it didn't stick because it was a long and complicated one. Swami something something Anandagiri, from what I remember. Bhagavan laughed and said, "That's far too big a name. I'm going to carry on calling you Kanji Swami." Bhagavan refused to acknowledge either his new sannyasa state or the name that went with it. On the main photo on the right, Kanji Swami is standing with his arms folded. Behind Bhagavan, on the top group photo, he's standing on the top right. The next featured devotee on this list is Maurice Friedman. In the top photo, he's feeding monkeys at Ramanaswaram. In the group photo with Bhagavan, he is circled in red. This group photo is dated 1934 and is probably the earliest recorded photo of him at Ramanaswaram. When Bhagavan turned down Maurice's request to be given sannyasa, he went to Kerala and received the requisite initiation from Swami Ramdas. He wore the orange robes for a while, calling himself Bharatananda, meaning the bliss of India. However, he said that he eventually found the robes to be an impediment and gave them up. When he later, in the 1960s, worked with the Tibetan community in North India, one of the Dalai Lamas, senior lamas, told him that he could see that he had been a Buddhist monk in a previous life and that he had retained his desire to wear orange from that life. During his visit to Swami Ramdas to get the initiation he required, Ramdas made the comment that appears on the screen. It was published in Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi, Talk 179, and it dates from 1936. It says, Mr. Friedman had asked Swami Ramdas something to which he replied that there will be no more births for himself. Since the grammar of this sentence is ambiguous and could be indicating a final birth for either Ramdas or Friedman, in the 1980s I asked Ganeshan about it. He said that it definitely referred to Friedman's final birth because he returned from Kerala in 1936, telling everyone at Ramanaswaram that he'd been promised that he was in his final birth. Apparently the people at Ramanaswaram made fun of him because in those days they tended to see him as a Western businessman who periodically showed up at the ashram in a suit and a tie. That's how he appears in the photo with Bhagavan on the top right. Maurice ran an electrical engineering factory in Bangalore on behalf of the Diwan of Mysore state. After his initiation, he carried on working there, but showed up for work in his orange robes. He took sannyasa seriously and even went out begging for his food. He only put his suit on if important visitors were scheduled to visit the factory. Maurice spent decades as an industrious karma yogi, helping with Gandhian-inspired projects all over India. In the 1960s, he devoted a lot of his energies to helping the recently arrived Tibetan refugees in India. In the early 1970s, he discovered Nisargadatta Maharaj and went on to compile the modern spiritual classic, I Am That. Ramdas's prophecy was eventually fulfilled, and Nisargadatta declared him to be fully liberated. That's Friedman speaking in the top left photo, the man behind the microphone. Nisargadatta is seated at the table second from the right. I'm developing a particular theme here. The devotees whom Bhagavan refused to initiate were not turned down because they were spiritually immature. Decades after having his initiation request turned down by Bhagavan, Sadhu Nathananda wrote Tamil verses proclaiming his liberation. In between, he had lived as a householder, taking care of his family. Friedman, after being turned down by Bhagavan, spent decades engaging energetically in social uplift projects before he too was declared enlightened by Nisargadatta. I can add another devotee to this rarefied list. Papaji, seen here in two 1940s photos. The top photo is from 1942, a couple of years before he arrived at Ramanasramam, while the right side one dates from the late 1940s. Bhagavan had sent him away from Ramanasramam in mid-1947 with orders to take his family out of Western Punjab, since it would not have been safe for them to remain in Pakistan. Papaji had asked Bhagavan to initiate him into sannyasa around 1944, and like everyone else who had asked the same question, he was turned down. Papaji had been the primary earner in his family throughout the 1930s and 40s, and in the 50s and 60s he worked in mining camps in Karnataka and Goa, supervising all the above-ground logistics for the companies he was employed by. Again, here is a highly mature devotee whose request to be initiated into sannyasa was turned down. Papaji was so ready, he got the full and permanent realization of the self within a few months of meeting Bhagavan in 1944, but Bhagavan did not allow him to use that as a pretext for abandoning his family or his responsibilities. The final big name devotee I'm going to cite here on this list is Muruggana, seen here sitting on the bottom right of a group photo taken at Ramanashram. He also asked Bhagavan to give him sannyasa, and he too, like everyone else, was turned down. Muruggana's case is a little different. He did give up his family life and lived the life of a sannyasin, but without ever receiving initiation from Bhagavan or anyone else. Early on in his association with Bhagavan, he sold all his belongings, donated the proceeds to Ramanasramam, and for the rest of his life lived off begged food. When he finally moved into Ramanasram in his final years, he said, "You're not going to turn me into a householder." He would turn up at the ashram dining room and beg at the kitchen door for his food. He would take the offered food back to his room and eat it there. He didn't even use a begging bowl when he did this. He would collect the food in a cloth, which I imagine would have leaked as he took its contents back to its room. Bhagavan's blanket refusal to give sannyasa even to highly mature devotees was highly unusual for his era. There was a widespread belief that giving up one's family affairs in order to pursue spiritual practices was not just beneficial, it was regarded by many teachers as being essential if one wanted to succeed. Bhagavan was very much going against the cultural and spiritual grain when he persistently refused to give devotees sannyasa or even permit them to leave their family roles in order to devote more time to spiritual pursuits. Once, when Annamalai Swami, seen here on the top left of the slide, told Bhagavan he had a desire to go and live in a cave on Arunachala and meditate there, Bhagavan advised him not to do it, saying, "That will just create a desire to live in a cave, and you will then have to be reborn to fulfill it." For Bhagavan, the traditional accoutrements of tapas were just a trap. Liberation, he said, comes from eliminating the I thought, not from adopting a sadhu-like lifestyle. Maurice Friedman's attachment to his orange robes in a previous life might well have propelled him to an unwise decision to take sannyasa in his final birth, and possibly Bhagavan headed off Annamalai Swami's desire. He never went to live in his cave. I want to revert to Papaji one more time in this discussion. On the right, there is a photo of him taken near Rishikesh in 1972, and On the left, there is a group photo of him walking in the same area in 1969. Papaji went to the Himalayas almost every year, but he was not impressed with the spiritual state of the people who had dropped out of family life to live there. He told me once, one of my mottos is, show me the results. If people come to me saying that they're following some great practice or method, I will say, show me the results. How many people have got enlightened doing this? How many people can you point to? Physical renunciation is one of the things that is always recommended, he continued, but I've never seen positive results from it. I have traveled all over the Himalayas and seen thousands of sadhus and sannyasins who gave up their family lives to seek liberation in caves or ashrams. I have yet to come across any who succeeded, which is why I don't recommend it to people who come to see me. If I could see that it was producing results, I would be more than happy to advocate it, but since I'm not seeing those results, I won't advise this course of action. And then he said, I travel all over India, meeting householders in their own homes. In my opinion, the people who are following their spiritual life at home, looking after their families and working to support them, are in a far better spiritual state than most of the sadhus I have met in the Himalayas. I'm going to conclude this section on renunciation and sannyasa in Bhagavan's teachings by going back to the story of Rangan. I mentioned him earlier in my talk today. He was the devotee whom Bhagavan kept close to him for most of a year because he could sense that his Prarabdha had some unpleasant events in store for him. Several months of immersion in Bhagavan's physical presence headed off the dangers that were due to come to him. This is a completely separate incident that took place at Skandashram. That's Bhagavan sitting with his mother at Skandashram. On the right, Rangan's photo is below it. In his report, Rangan said, when I started to visit Bhagavan regularly at Skandashram, it occurred to me that it would be good if I became a sannyasin, a mendicant monk. I knew that this was a foolish and irresponsible dream because it would leave my family already in a precarious financial position with no one to support them. However, the thought would not leave me. I should mention that Rangan was unemployed at the time and had a wife and children who needed to be cared for. Even to contemplate this was highly irresponsible. When Bhagavan heard about his unemployed situation, he promised to take care of him, a promise that eventually resulted in a job in a company that manufactured buses. The commissions he earned from selling their buses provided the money he needed to marry off two of his daughters. Rangan continues with his story. One night when I was lying in my bed at Skandashram, I was unable to sleep because this thought of taking sannyasa kept recurring so strongly. As I was turning uneasily in my bed, Bhagavan came to my side and asked me, what is the matter? Are you in pain? Venkataraman, Bhagavan's childhood name. I replied, I want to adopt sannyasa. That's a photo of Bhagavan sitting on the front wall of Skandashram. Rangan continues, Bhagavan went away and came back with a copy of Bhakti Vijayan, an anthology of the lives of some famous saints who lived in Western India many centuries ago. He opened the book and read out the story in which Saint Vitoba decided to take sannyasa. In the story, his son, Jnanadeva, who was an incarnation of Lord Vishnu, gave him the following advice. Wherever you are, whether in worldly society or the forest, the same mind is always with you. It is the same old mind wherever you reside. The photo shows Bhagavan sitting next to a dog at the entrance to Skandashram. This is a group photo taken in the kitchen courtyard of Skandashram. Rangan concludes his account in the following way. After reading this out, Bhagavan added, you can attain jnana even while you are living in samsara, worldly activities. Then why did you become a sannyasin? I countered. That was my Prarabdha, destiny, replied Bhagavan. Life in the family is difficult and painful, no doubt, but it is easier to become a jnani while living as a householder. This is the only instance I know of Bhagavan stating that liberation is easier for a householder than a sannyasin, but it is a reasonable inference to make from all the comments he made about sannyasa and all the times he refused to allow anyone to abandon their homes and responsibilities in favor of solitary spiritual endeavors. Last month, I promised that I would complete my presentation of the unpublished Narayana Iyer chapter in this month's talk. Unfortunately, with all the extra material, I added on the power of the Guru's presence to mitigate or eliminate Prarabdha and the lengthy digressions into the value of book learning and taking sannyasa. I am nowhere near completing new material on Narayana Iyer. I will take it up again next month, but this time I'm not going to promise that I will finish it all in one talk. I may end up with some more digressions. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to continuing the story next month. Thank you.
David, would you like to take a few questions?
David, I suppose you could say that what ultimately happens is someone's Prarabdha, so that what might have happened wasn't actually their Prarabdha.
This is an interesting question. Every satsang, every teacher I've ever been with, this question comes up, and everyone goes round and round in circles debating it with no particular conclusion. But there's I wish I could find it. There's a story by Meister Eckhart, who was just as deterministic as Bhagavan, possibly even more so. And the story I'm half remembering, I couldn't find it when I tried to look it up, was Meister Eckhart saying that don't feel pleased with yourself when you pray to God for something to happen and God grants your request, because God had already decided at the moment he created the world that at such and such a time you would make that prayer to him and that he would in that moment decide to answer it. So it's nothing to do with you, it's nothing to do with the hold you have over God. Your prayer, and whether it was answered or not, was part of the script at the moment of creation. So that's very much the position that you're taking, that you can say Prarabdha is what happens, not a script that might happen that has a potential for change. But I'm not willing to argue that one way or the other. It's just a more extreme version of what Prarabdha might be. Here's something that's interesting. I was talking to Miri about this, that if you see Prarabdha as a script, like a movie script that's playing out on the screen, at the end of the movie, after the final denouement, there's a big sign that comes on the screen that says the end. So I sometimes wonder if the end is part of Prarabdha or not. Is our ending, is the ending of our I am the body idea and identification with it, is that a scripted moment? Could it happen anytime, or is it not going to happen unless some effort, some practice, some attempt to not identify with the body takes place? Again, I'm not going to come down on either side of that argument. But what I will say is that I am absolutely convinced that Bhagavan's liberation in 1896 was somehow a very tightly choreographed, very tightly scripted event. Bhagavan used to say that Ishvara allocates karma to us, and he arranges things in a particular way to give us the maximum benefit from our actions in this life. I think that Arunachaleshwara put Bhagavan in a place where he could physically commute to Tiruvannamalai without too much difficulty, that he was constantly making himself aware of him inside Bhagavan as Bhagavan was growing up. Bhagavan said that Arunachala was constantly pulling him inwards during his childhood. At the age of 16, Bhagavan said it was primarily the thought of Arunachala that enlightened him. The proximate cause might have been the act of self-inquiry, but I think the main cause, in which Bhagavan said was the main cause, was thinking of Arunachala. Then he stayed at home for a while, went to Tiruvannamalai, and just happened to arrive on a day when the main temple was closed. This is something that happened every more than a generation. I think every 50 or 60 years they closed the temple for a day so that all the ornaments of the gods could be cleaned and polished. So you can't do a puja unless the gods are properly decorated. So the temple got closed for a day. Bhagavan showed up at the front door, and miraculously, all the big doors opened. He walked in, there were no priests in there because it was closed. And that allowed him to step over the bar in the inner sanctum and hug the lingam, something that would never, ever have been allowed had there been any staff in there. And I often think this is a very tightly scripted life that Bhagavan had. He was brought up in a Tamil-speaking world. Arunachala made itself known to him. It brought him to liberation. It physically took him to Arunachala. Remember when Bhagavan wrote his farewell note, he started off in search of my father and in obedience to his command. It wasn't his choice to go to Arunachala. Arunachala had liberated him, and then Arunachala ordered him to come. So off Bhagavan left, off Bhagavan went, got to Tirunamala and presented himself at the doors of the temple on the one day, give or take 50 years either way, that he could have the whole temple to himself, that he could walk in and hug the lingam. It's somewhat fanciful, but I'm firmly of the opinion that somehow Bhagavan's final lifetime was scripted in such a way that he showed up on the door of that temple on that particular day. So I think in his case that there was the big sign saying the end, and it was going to be scheduled on a particular date, and that date allowed him to turn up in Tirunamala on a day when he could have the whole temple to himself. I know that's somewhat fanciful, but I like that story and I'm sticking to it.
So the first question is there any record of a devotee or anyone having been given a premonition of a pending realization in their dreams?
In their dreams? Not that I can think of. It's interesting that many, though I say many, it's a very small sample in the jnani world, but they all seem to think that they're not good people and that they're a long way from realization, right up to the moment when it happens. That there's a humbleness about them that makes it hard for them to feel or believe that they're only whatever, a few days, few weeks, a few months away from having it happen. I don't know any who had it in a dream. The stories I told today are Sadhu Nathanananda was promised, it's your final life. Swami Ramdas was told, it's your final life. That wasn't in a dream, that was in the waking state. And that those predictions were made by, I would say, qualified teachers. And that's what eventually came to pass. Bhagavan could see Nathanananda was very advanced, Ramdas could see Friedman was very advanced, and they both seemed to have the knowledge that this was going to be the final birth for those two devotees, but I don't think that information was conveyed in a dream to either of them. It was just a personal prediction by two very eminent and very well qualified teachers.
The next question is, could I ask why Ramana said it was easier for a householder?
You can ask, but I can't give you an answer. I mean, that did seem to be his firm conviction. As the stories I told today should make clear, he didn't seem to think that becoming a sannyas was necessary or even advantageous. He said, as the Jnanadev story maintains, wherever you go, you have to take your mind with you. So Bhagavan said it's not your physical circumstances that increase your chances of liberation. It's how well you tackle the I am the doer, I am the person who lives in a body idea. And he said that can be tackled in your own home. It's not necessary to abandon your duties and responsibilities in samsara. He said, whatever you've been issued with, live with it, deal with it, and in whatever spare time you have, work on this sense of being a doer, an individual person, and you can have better results as a householder. I think this is something that the teachers I've spoken about today are determining empirically. I think Bhagavan had noted he hadn't seen good results from all the people who ran off. I think if you run off, then you tend to always be obsessing over food, or you're worried about am I going to get sick? Am I going to find a cave to live in? How am I going to survive? I think you get into a kind of survival mode. It's not a comfortable position where you have hours and hours every day to sit down and meditate on God. I remember, I think Michael told me that in the early 1950s, Sadhu Om and Muruggana went on a begging tour of South India. They just wanted to disappear for a while. Muruggana was a natural ascetic and used to beg for his food every day. And Sadhu Om said it was a good eye-opener for me. I thought I was quite advanced, but he said every day you wake up and the only thought you have is, am I going to eat today? So I think if you're not naturally a sannyasin by inclination, I think if you suddenly decide to throw caution to the winds and let life look after you, if you've never done that before, if you don't have the kind of background which makes it comfortable and easy, you're going to spend most of your time worried about your health or your accommodation. You're not going to have all that anticipated time to sit and meditate all day.
There's a question from Gita Shamana. Gita, would you like to ask the question?
Yes, thank you. David, you mentioned that the grip of Prarabdha is loosened when devotees are in the presence of a jnani. Does this presence also extend to books or lectures?
That's a really good question. I would say that you're in the samadhi anytime that you're making contact with the guru, and making contact can be in the personal presence, it can be reading his teachings, it can be listening to his words, it can be thinking about him, it can be looking at his picture. I think you create the samadhi by your attention to the guru in whatever form you want to envisage it. If you're practicing the teachings, you're in the samadhi. If you're reading a book about him, you're in the samadhi, just as much as if you're sitting in front of him. It's something that you create by your desire to be in that presence. There's a verse that Bhagavan occasionally quoted. It appears in Padamalai, and it says something to the effect, if you take one step towards God, God takes 9 steps towards you. So there are 2 things here. The first is that the response is disproportionately in your favor. If you make a little step, you get a gigantic response from God, from the presence, from the guru. But also, if you look at the grammar of this, you have to make the first step. God isn't going to do anything until you make an effort to look at him, think of him, read his teachings, practice what he has to say. So I think if you make that first step, then the power of the samadhi comes into effect. The ninefold strength that comes back is you making an effort to tune into it, and then God or the guru creating that samadhi which makes the response. But you have to take the initiative. If you're in the physical presence, then it's there. You don't have to make the effort. But if you're not in the physical presence, then it's your own effort that creates the samadhi and makes it work for you.
Thank you.
The last question, David, is the one which is in the chat box, which is, I accept that everything is already scripted, but what about murderers and evildoers? Are they absolved from their sins if it is already scripted beforehand, and it is not their fault that they committed the wrongdoings? Please clarify.
Free will exists so long as you imagine you're a person inside a body. This is what Bhagavan always said, that from the point of view of the self, there is neither free will nor determination. They're both theories that could apply to an individual jiva. If the individual jiva doesn't exist, there is neither free will nor predetermination. So Bhagavan said there's no karma in the self, there's no prarabdha in the self. It's only something that comes into being when there is an identification with a person. And he said, if you do identify with a person, then you are responsible for whatever choices that person makes. It's not a get out of jail free ticket to say, oh, it's all in the script, I'm only doing what God made me do it. The God made me do it excuse doesn't wash in this particular case. They're not absolved simply because it's part of their prarabdha. If you do an act with the I am the doer feeling, then you create more karma. If you do it with personal malice, personal intent, then there are bad consequences. You can't get out of this by saying, oh, I had to do it, it was part of my script.
Could it be that Bhagavan's death
Could it be that Bhagavan's death experience was for our benefit, like an actor playing a part on stage for our understanding? In fact, as he came into our incarnation, he was already an enlightened master who had his part to play on the world stage, exemplifying a perfected soul's journey, with the death experience being a key part of that narrative arc. Being perfected, the various stages of Bhagavan's life were only symbolic outer expressions for us to make sense of. A few things to unpack here. I don't think Bhagavan came into this world as, shall we say, an avatar or an enlightened person. I think he came in like everybody else as a jiva who had the merit, the good fortune, the long practice to be able to realize the self very quickly in his final birth. And one piece of evidence I will put forward for that is there's a very interesting section in Talks where Bhagavan is explaining a rather dry and somewhat complex Sanskrit text. And he pulls himself up and says, it's lucky that my purva samskaras took me straight to inquiry, otherwise I might have got lost in Sanskrit texts such as these. So the purva samskaras are the habits, predilections that you carry forward from your previous life. So in that one sentence, Bhagavan is conceding that he did have a previous unenlightened life, and that in that life, he was obviously quite good at Sanskrit, that he had a passion for Sanskrit philosophy, but his greater passion was for self-inquiry. And he said, I was very lucky that my greater passion for self-inquiry took me straight to inquiry. Otherwise, I might have got lost in texts such as these. So I think very occasional stray comments such as these are indicating that it wasn't an incarnation of some divine being who came down in a ready-made enlightened state. I think he had his period of practice. As I mentioned before, in his childhood, he was being absorbed into the thought of Arunachala, the presence of Arunachala, and in later years he wrote that the thought of Arunachala, the presence of Arunachala, liberated him. So he wasn't saying that he was born in an enlightened state. He was saying he came, that Arunachala captured him, processed him, pulled him into itself, and finally liberated him. And from that moment on, he was a liberated sage, but I don't think he came into this world as an enlightened being. In the traditional avatar stories, Krishna, Vishnu, they come with a specific purpose, a specific function, a specific destiny. They get born, they grow up, they have to fulfill that destiny. Bhagavan said the jnani doesn't have any role, function, destiny. He says that's the difference between the avatar and the jnani. The jnani has no obligations. He's not here to accomplish or achieve anything, whereas the avatar comes in with a job to do, with some business to transact. So I would see Bhagavan as a jnani, someone who arrived in his final birth in a very advanced state, who fell in love with the name of the divine. His constant obsession with that name of the divine pulled him into the self and finally liberated him. And for the rest of his life, he became absorbed in that divine. But I don't think that you can say that he had an enlightened existence before coming into a final incarnation. I think he was just a very, very advanced sadhak who had done all his work in previous lives, came to this one, had an immense attraction to inquiry, as that quote I just said mentioned, and that's why he advocated it to all the people who came to him afterwards. I want to mention one more thing before I go. I gave a long, sort of off-the-cuff statement that I remembered Papaji saying. He said, I've traveled all over the Himalayas, I've met hundreds of sadhus, and I don't see that their renunciation has benefited them very much. The householder devotees I meet traveling around India seem to me to be in a far better state than all of these people who've run away from their families and gone to live in caves in the Himalayas. At that point, two devotees immediately jumped up in my head, and I thought, no, this talk is going to go on forever if I mention them. So it's like the bonus extras on your DVD. I've decided to make two separate little talks about two devotees of Papaji who I think exemplify this particular faith that he had, that the householder devotees have the edge over the sannyasis. So that they won't come out as part of this series of talks, but at some point in the next week or two, I will record them and post them on my YouTube channel. They will be about probably 40 minutes each, which is why I couldn't digress into their stories. So that there will be stories of two outstanding devotees who, for me, illustrate the basic contention of Papaji's theory that it's better to stay with your family than run off to the Himalayas.